Most often, people outside of this will think, oh, here's a request for more money. But that's not always the case. Often, but not always the case. Capacity development can also be the provision of hardware, GNSS cores, gravimeter, or even access to data collection services. It can be access to expertise and knowledge. We're already finding here in 3 days of the workshop that there's a lot of experience in many different aspects of geodesy across the Americas region. We can see that there are already several opportunities where groups are working together, and I hope you can also see that as well. Data is also a capacity that organizations very often request. Could be data sharing aspects across borders to help with geoid model, coordinate transformations. Again, that's a capacity that can be helped or provided. Policy is also a very important one. We've talked and introduced you to the governance aspects, and hopefully you realize how critical they are. Well, helping with governance and policy, that is also a form of capacity that you have to build and to develop and to maintain. And there's also time. I think everybody in the room, both in their professional and personal lives, would say that they are task rich and time poor. We always want more time. Holiday time, vacation time, processing time, and so on. So that's the what, but why do we need this? Well, we often need this because an organization doesn't have the resources from that list above there to be able to do a task or a set of activities within a time frame. And of course, it's very difficult if you have a task, let's say, around geoid modeling, but you might not have anybody within your team who has that experience, capability, access to the software. You might not even have all of the input data that you require for that, as mentioned earlier on. So this is really where you have to identify what you are needing. And it's also because groups want to share. They want to share their experiences. They want to share especially the lessons that they learned about what not to do. We always are most interested about, okay, what are the shortcuts for me to get this to work? But I also want to know what I shouldn't do because I'm going to lose time or it's not going to work for us. Well, how does this capacity development and building and sharing start? And it can depend. There is no special rule for it. It could be in the form of pushing your experience and your capacity, offering it, standing at the front of a room and say, we have an absolute gravimeter and a relative gravimeter. We're happy for somebody to use them for the next 3 months. You know, that is offering and sharing that. But it's also that organizations can request it. Oh, we need another couple of GNSS receivers to help us with an observation campaign. Capacity development, as you hear from the UN-GGCE, is very clear, but it's also known in other organizations, development agencies. They might call it knowledge transfer. They might call it outreach and engagement, or education, training, and capacity building. There are various different names, but they all fall down to the core part of sharing experiences backwards and forwards between collaborative groups. It's also very important to mention that it's not just your organization reaching out internationally or to another ministry or another agency within your government requesting these resources or offering it. There's also that within your teams, and we call this in-reach. One prime example is that we see and we really hope that when you go back from this workshop and get back to your normal work next week, that you can be sharing information about this workshop, your tips and tricks. And that's also a very important and necessary capacity building activity. You can talk about it at the water cooler or the coffee time and sharing information, and that's very positive. We put this slide in as well because, of course, the Geodesy crisis, as in many different things, everything's a crisis. But what is the Geodesy crisis? Is it a lack of geodesists? Is it a lack of resources? A lack of funding? A lack of support? Is it a lack of understanding? Is it a lack of interest? Well, it's all of the above in some way. It depends who you're speaking with. Depends which stakeholder you speak with. Depends which government department or senior manager or minister you speak with. It can be any one of those parts. And this is why capacity development is becoming even more important, to work and collaborate and get access to what you need to be able to do your job. That's also part of that sustainability of your geodetic activities, which ultimately contribute to the global geodetic reference frame. I want to share just some sources of capacity development with you. And again, please note, capacity development is not necessarily an official letter from your head of department or your minister writing and asking for information. It can also be done indirectly at meetings and events like this, about starting to discuss the opportunities of where capacity and resources can be shared. But some organizations that you could consider are the United Nations. Obviously, now the GGCE has established a dedicated center around geodesy and helping build and share that capacity. And as Nick mentioned several times, and he's even on video saying this, you're his boss. You know, when you have requests and needs, feel free to reach out to the center to help. The center will help to craft the messages. They will help you also direct and, you know, really focus on the ask or the request that you make. And that's also part of that capacity development activity. There are many other groups within UN which are geospatial related. UN-GGCE, we have some colleagues in the other room having some discussions. UN-USA, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, which you'll hear about more in my second presentation. There's the World Bank Group, well known for the fiscal funding. But of course, that's only one aspect. You still need the resources, the people to be able to use, operate, install, and so on. There are development banks. And apologies, I haven't picked on one here that might be relevant to the Americas, but the Asian Regional Development Bank is one that's familiar to me from Australia because it has, you know, a pan-Asia coverage. There's also the academic community willing to provide information and understanding, training materials as well, including UN-GGCE's academic network, the International Association of Geodesy also has an early career scientists group, which again is a very important part of capacity building because it's helping with the next generation and making them feel involved, giving them an opportunity and a mechanism and a space to be able to network and grow. There are also different corporate entities, charities, foundations who do have funding, fiscal funding typically, but they also see the benefit of geospatial on different parts of the world, different regions, and to different themes such as environment, climate change as well. They're also organizations that you should be considering when you're looking for funding and assistance and you want to build your capacity, not just necessarily upwards into your governments and ministries. I also want to share with you, and I'll do that in the second presentation, around the global community around geodesy, geospatial science, and different associations as well. So these are not necessarily the geodesists and surveying scientists that you'll meet and work with most regularly, but these are other groups and individuals who are very interested in volunteering and sharing their experiences. I also have to mention one of the institutional risks, and it's actually not a risk. It's no longer a risk. It's a hard fact. And it was very clear that with the termination of development funding through USAID, and that announcement that was made in January this year, that's obviously had and will still have significant impact a negative impact over the coming years. You know, this was an organization who in 2023 disbursed 72 billion US dollars to various different projects, nations, regions that was used for various activities. That is a huge hole in terms of funding. And unfortunately, it's also triggered that other countries and member states are reviewing and revising their development aid contributions. It would be fantastic to think that other countries would dig deeper into their pocket and get some more funds out, but that's not really the reality. And that's also one of the other parts which will lead into our communication and marketing, is that Geodesy, if it is asking for additional funding, say through the World Bank or a regional development bank, you're going to have to improve your message and improve the quality of your request, because that $72 billion has disappeared and everybody's now competing for even smaller amount of development funding. It's a really important thing to think about. I'm going to go on to a few slides now around case studies, and these will talk around some activities that have been done in different locations around the world, different regions. And the purpose of this is to provide evidence to you. Yes, look, capacity development does work. I'm sure you do realize that it is working. You're at this capacity workshop from the center, but also that it can work in different scenarios and different situations. I hope that you find it motivating in a way to say, yes, let's consider that capacity development and potentially reaching out to different organizations to ask for funding or help or support. And hopefully it will also inspire you in some way to think and craft your particular message. These examples are not only specifically Geodesy, and that's for two purposes. The first is, as we will hear in the business case section, it's extremely difficult to request funding and capacity if you're only stating Geodesy challenges. When you state challenges that involve Geodesy, but also involve another societal challenge, such as rising sea levels, such as food safety, such as disaster reduction management, that's where there's more chance of getting this additional capacity, whether it's funding, people, resources. So these examples will have a Geodesy flavor or element in there, but there'll be also another big global problem attached to it. Working together is the most effective way of achieving success in terms of getting additional funding. Land administration, that land security, how can especially developing nations or nations from what are known as the global south or low to middle income countries, how can the security of land parcels and land titles be secured? Well, one critical aspect of this is actually ensuring that there is georeferencing going on of this, and that georeferencing is reliable, but also findable, accessible, traceable, interoperable as well. So these are very important aspects to be considering. This was an example that we put forward just ahead of the Africa workshop in Kenya, which we held in Kenya, but it was fantastic to be able to talk around Geodesy and geodetic related activities were, almost the first half of this particular workflow of digitization activities. You can't digitize it in the real world or from the real world if you don't have an accurate and reliable and accessible georeferencing system. Geodesy is needed for that. We wanted to share a couple of slides also from my colleague Dr. Eva, who was one of the architects of the material of this, but she wanted to share is, it's fantastic just thinking around nice technology and approaches and workflows and slides, but you also have to think about the reality on the ground, and this is from some of their experiences around data collection. Surveying measurement collection in Chad. And it didn't matter how good GNSS or total station you had for collecting this data, you were still working on little marks in the ground in a dusty day in the middle of a small village in the middle of Chad in Africa. And you have to be aware that no matter how advanced and rigorous all your solutions are, they still have to be fit for purpose for the application and the end users in here. And explaining precision and accuracy to the local chief, very difficult, because it all relates down to the pegs that they physically can see. The idea of ownership, belonging, title, rights, all came down to a few iron poles in the ground in different places. Some further examples there around where land administration, and here the social tenure domain model, that's also been used and facilitated by UN Habitat, for example, and different organizations. But one main element around that is in the spatial unit you can see in the top right. Again, everything there has to be geo-referenced. We've had various feedback from different nations. Well, that's the challenge. We have all of these historical legal land parcels that might be 20, 30, 50 plus years old in a non-geocentric datum, probably in a local datum, a local reference system that wasn't so rigorous to begin with, and everything needs to be modernized. But how do we handle those transitions? We always need to think back. I'll just jump over these ones. Other terms, other initiatives and frameworks, we have the IGIF, being discussed earlier this week by our colleagues across the campus. Well, there's also a framework for effective land administration. And again, this is now an initiative which is being promoted and championed by UN-GGCE. But again, the technology and the standards and the data and the georeferencing are a critical part of this. What I hope you take away from these is it's not just Geodesy that we're all most interested in and is closest to our heart, but we also have to really understand where our technology and capability fits into other larger projects, such as land administration, and understand where we can fit in and contribute to those, where we can offer our capacity, our capability as well. I also wanted to share, this was an example, this is from our colleagues in Sweden, from the Swedish National Mapping Agency, Lantmäteriet. And even though Sweden is, yes, a lovely country, it's very far away from Africa and Southern Europe, but in terms of capacity building, there are different nations also who are offering their skills, their experiences to help nations implement geodetic reference systems, coordinate reference systems, but also support land administration and effective titling. And this is just some examples where Lantmäteriet has a number of dedicated resources who go out and help and assist and help the local governments or the national governments to implement a fit-for-purpose solution involving Geodesy and coordinate reference systems. Another very good example of capacity building has been across the Pacific Island, the Pacific community. Obviously, this is something very close to Nick and I in terms of Australian government, and the Pacific Island is, yes, right at our footsteps, at our coastline. And probably over the last 20 or so years, the Pacific community have started to realize it's extremely hard for us to do these geodesy and surveying activities individually as islands. Yes, we might have many islands in our nation, but if we work together, if we build that community, we build that capability across the Pacific Islands and territories, then we have more chance of success. And this is actually a fantastic positive case study where now this PGSC has one element of the community that represents all of those nations whose flags you see at the bottom of that screen. And they perform a number of different roles. And here are just an example of some of those. They provide the advocacy and awareness. They work around climate change adaptation. All of those are island nations. They're not small island states. They call themselves large ocean nations, where they are reliant on the ocean for the majority of their lifelines, their fishing, their food, logistical support, transportation, tourism. You know, that's a huge part of their economies, if not, you know, the clear majority. And they realize that, okay, we have to cope with many challenges, but we can do this together. So some of the nations have specific experiences around GNSS data processing, others around height datums. They share GNSS equipment for survey campaigns, for GNSS reference stations, and so on, across their region. So together they've all realized we can all build on our relative strengths. And this is a fantastic example. One of the things that they do also, and is definitely a strength for them, especially in terms of securing further capacity and resourcing, is they're very proactive in promoting and marketing their activities. It's fair enough coming to a meeting like this and somebody talking, we did this survey, we went to this event, we did this surveying height campaign and so on. But if you can actually get that out onto the internet and present presentations, articles, webinars, interviews, that is also another fantastic example of marketing and promoting your needs and your activities, but it also raises the chance of you getting additional funding or collaboration. You have to be out there flying and waving your flag. Oops. Here are some of the workshops that they've been to. And they also have coordinators who work there to help field those requests and field those activities. One of the things that we note is that so much of Geodesy and the Geodesy community and activities that are done are the voluntary parts. The parts that are done when work stops, or when work stops paying, which 5 o'clock or something like that. And so much of this activity around the world, all countries, there's a considerable amount of in-kind volunteering because people see the need for this. There's a few slides on here where I was sharing information about UN-GGCE Americas. I apologize if it's not most up to date, but this set of slides, I'm not going to tell you about it. You should be telling me about this. But we've been demonstrating and sharing this with the other regions to talk about how regional networks can work together very effectively, and gave a number of demonstrations from the Americas region around the different working groups, you know, considering some of the challenges relative and specific to the area, sharing information around the technical guidelines that have been generated within the region as well. That's also very important. And this is also where these could potentially be shared with other regions, or at least maintained or collaborated on for a future version or for an update. We were also sharing information around the training activities that go on, because that's also extremely important. Bringing together people for workshops face to face, I hope you will find is a much more effective way than only by remote webinars. Some other faces as well, but we just wanted to show this and share this with the other regions. So well done for all of your activities here. You really are flagship for the other regions. Translation is also another aspect. You know, there's so much material out there. I'm sure that we all have different documents and guidelines, information sheets within our own data archives that others are probably thinking, yeah, that would be great. We would love these documents. A how-to guide for something, or, for example, we heard from Colombia, guidelines about VLBI processing. Well, we don't all have VLBI stations, but just I'd never heard of such a document. So Nick and I are very excited to be able to see something like that and help to facilitate it be translated in other languages as well. You know, these are small things that could benefit many others. And also, again, to reiterate, this is what the Centre is, you know, is willing and available to do, is to help do that translation so that your organization doesn't have to incur costs for translating it to a language which is not your, you know, not your end users or stakeholders. The Centre can assist with that. I want to take a few moments also running across, but I want to introduce also some other organizations and their regional networks and the different types of networks, in particular the FIG networks, the International Federation of Surveyors. I'm a member of this in various roles, which I'll talk about later, but our networks are also really well established and, by all accounts, are very productive and effective in sharing capacity across regions, or even between regions as well. We have a network which relates to standards, especially around measurement. We also looking to extend this with more knowledge and understanding and experiences around the geodetic registers we heard about yesterday. We have regional networks in the Americas. I know that a few of you are involved with this as well. Rosario is also very deeply involved with the FIG Americas regional network, as well as Dan Roman, who you may have seen at previous events. We have a similar network across Africa, the Africa Regional Network, which is led and maintained by Africans for Africa. And that's also a really important part. We also have an Asia-Pacific capacity development network, and Nick and I have both been active members at that at different times as well. And last but definitely not least is also the Young Surveyors Network. This again is another important part of that capacity development, is giving that space for early career surveyors, whether they're geodesists, land surveyors, valuation surveyors, GIS experts, anybody in the geospatial industry and ecosystem can benefit and be members of this, as long as you're under 35. But again, that's part of career development as well. There are also various volunteer surveyor programs as well. FIG has been involved with the Volunteer Community Surveyor program with a number of different successful in-country deployments, as you see there with the green and red markers. The green and red signify whether it was a surveying campaign or whether it was a workshop and collaboration of that. But one thing is here, I'd love to see that in a couple of years' time with a few markers for the Americas region. And this is where I would like to invite anybody here to go and to reach out to FIG and see, to discuss about the opportunities around this. Asia Pacific, we also have similar activities where we work and we help be that interface between federal institutions, academic institutions, but also industry. Because like it or not, industry is also an important part of our ecosystem. Not only from providing the equipment, but they also can provide, in certain cases, either resources or expertise or help to facilitate events and training. So that's also an important one and shouldn't be overlooked. And another part of capacity, it's not just being there in person. It's also making access to publications and resources and documents. They're also forms of capacity and capability that you can rely on, or you can start to rely on, but you can also contribute to as well. But I'll let you go through those in your own leisure. Ultimately, collaboration is key. And you may remember that from some initial statements first thing on Monday morning. The key to success for this is collaboration, is working together, is asking, is sharing, is offering, is discussing, reviewing. There's a few insights in there as to how you can ask around things, but it's pretty critical that you know, if you are asking for capacity, that you can clearly define and summarize what you're asking for. If you think about with children and so on, they come in, oh, I'm hungry. What do you want? Oh, I'm hungry. But if you can really focus down what you're asking for, then that makes it much more efficient and more likely to succeed in terms of getting resources or capacity. This slide shows a number of icons of organizations that have either contributed to some of these case studies or that we know and have personal experience of providing capacity, whether it is that funding or equipment or access to training facilities and so on. And these are just an example of organizations that, if you are seeking that capacity, is to define what you're asking for and then consider reaching out to some of these organizations. At least become familiar with any of their activities in your region or any local contacts or representatives as well. Some of the main takeaways: assistance is always available. You need to ask for it. And asking for assistance and help and support is not a weakness. And I think the Geodesy community is more than happy to help out a fellow geodesist or surveyor when they're asking for help or clarification or assistance. What is also very important is that you're clear and objective about what you'd like that assistance with and how it's going to benefit you, how you're going to use it and apply it. So reach out, participate, collaborate, and also start to develop that mindset when we go into business case justification tomorrow, when you're actually asking for extra dollars as well.